India-Japan relationship was never a calculation for geopolitics. It was always based on the shared history, shared values like freedom, free speech, democracy. Now, this bilateral summit between India and Japan, this was the 16th, which was started with annual summit meeting started with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in his first term in 2006-7, when he also made a visit to Indian Parliament and gave a speech of the confluence of two seas. And this is only being furthered during his second tenure as the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan, then continued with Yoshihide Suga, Fumio Kishida, Shigeru Ishiba, and now Sanae Takaichi.
Namaste and welcome. I'm Swareena Singh and this is the Global Order. The 16th Japan-India Official Summit concluded 3 days ago and marked Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's maiden official visit to India. To understand the significance and the outcomes of the summit, Indo-Japan relations, the state of the Indo-Pacific region, as well as the overall geopolitics surrounding the region, today we are in conversation with Dr. Debendra Sahu, Associate Professor of Japanese Studies at the Jindal School of International Affairs and the Assistant Director at the Jindal India Institute. A recipient of the MEXT Fellowship offered by the Government of Japan, he pursued research at the University of Tokyo. Previously, he interviewed many high-level dignitaries, including the late former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Dr. Sahu has also been the Program Associate for the Human Resource Development in Asia for Peace Building, commissioned by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan and implemented by the Hiroshima Peace Builders Center. Last but not the least, he has also worked with a Japanese corporation as a director of research and has been at the helm of facilitating Japanese investment in India, specifically in Odisha. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. We look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Swareena, for having me here.
So I do want to start with since the summit just concluded, there was one thing that was coming to mind that I want to set clear before we begin, that since 1945, post the Second World War, Japan has mostly identified as a pacifist nation. And they had officially outlawed war as well as maintenance of any formal army, navy, or air force. But now, under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, there has been a formal announcement about how she plans over the next 5 years to increase the budget to up to 2% of the GDP. This is being seen by some as the remilitarization of Japan and by others as the normalization of a nation which was bound to do this given the current global context of the international arena. Any comments on this, or how should we understand this and how should we see this today?
So, you are right. In the post-war period, after Japan's defeat in the Second World War, the post-war defense policy of Japan has been of, non-militarization. So, if you have heard about the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, it prohibited Japan to have a regular army, navy, air force, which led to Japan call these institutions as Japanese self-defense force, air self-defense force, ground self-defense force, and maritime self-defense force. Now, that was the Yoshida doctrine, and Prime Minister Yoshida, he focused on primarily two things: the economic progress of the nation and depending militarily on United States for Japan's own security. That was kind of complementing the Article 9, which prohibited Japan to militarize itself, or kind of denouncing war as a sovereign right, or settling international disputes through military means. So all those which is very normal for any other country, was actually not a case for Japan. And in that case, Japan depended on United States for its own security for quite a long period of time. Now, come 2000s, and you know how geopolitical situation changed in the Korean Peninsula starting from 1998, when North Korea launched a Taekwondo missile above Japanese airspace, and clearly violating Japanese security. And then when Barack Obama came to power in the United States, the United States was also up in the post-Iraq war, United States was also kind of moving towards not being the so-called international policeman, which it used to be, and then try to look more towards domestic and saying, the withdrawal from Iraq, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which followed during Donald Trump's. So it was a clear sign that now the United States is not very much inclined towards interfering in others' domestic, other security position rather than they were only looking at their own national interest. Donald Trump in 2016 and then the second term, it was absolutely clear when Donald Trump even, kind of gave various statements saying Japan has to bear its own security burden. Now the country which forced Japan to have a constitution with Article 9 in it, and now, washing his hands out of all those, where do you think Japan should have gone? You are in a geopolitical difficult situation. In the Korean Peninsula, North Korea has all kind of missiles with nuclear warheads that can reach the entirety of Japan. Then there is China, like with his all kind of misadventures in the South China Sea, East China Sea. So Japan was almost in a difficult position. The only hope for Japan, which was like we call it American security umbrella or American nuclear umbrella, it was slowly that umbrella was slowly folding up. So to me, and then when you said like Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is the one who decided about going to 2%, it's not. It's not the case. It's not a one day decision or it's a sudden decision. It is being discussed. It was also reiterated by their biggest alliance, that is United States, that Japan must ramp up its own security. Japan must try to invest in its own security. It has always been the case. So in the Donald Trump's first term, when Shinzo Abe was the prime minister, then when Joe Biden was the president and Fumio Kishida was the prime minister here, it was all decided that they cannot be restricting their defense expenditure to below 1%. So it was a well thought out, well provoked, and well necessitated decision that Japan has taken to be a normal power, which it should be. So I don't see anything other than this in the remilitarization Japan, what many countries and particularly the East Asian, among the East Asian, particularly China, which makes a huge hue and cry, always pointing at the pre-World War difficult history between Japan and East Asian countries. I think given the situation, given the geopolitical considerations, I think Japan is well within its right. And it's also, Japan being a very responsible power, I think it is also in the best interest of the region as well as the world that Japan take that route.
Right, sir. Like you said, then it should not come as a shock because it is a result of a discussion that was going on for a while. And I think they've been like that for a while, but now the instability is growing further. So that decision is well thought out. It's just that the current administration seems to have taken a more explicit stance towards it. That being said, against this backdrop, the India Japan official summit, as much as it was a diplomatic engagement, do you think it could also mark a turning point for the relations that these two countries share, India and Japan? And what does it mean for the strategic balance of Indo-Pacific at large?
India-Japan relationship was never a calculation for geopolitics. It was always based on the shared history, shared values like freedom, free speech, democracy. This also brought the Quad countries together, the free and open Indo-Pacific of Japan or the Mahasagar doctrine of India. It just takes these values further. Now, this bilateral summit between India and Japan, this was the 16th, which was started with annual summit meeting started with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in his first term in 2006-7, when he also made a visit to Indian Parliament and gave a speech of the confluence of two seas. And this is only being furthered during his second tenure as the longest serving Prime Minister of Japan, then continued with Yoshihide Suga, Fumio Kishida, Shigeru Ishiba, and now Sanae Takaichi. This particular Takaichi's visit from 1st to 3rd July it is phenomenal in some senses. Obviously, like when India Japan talks, there would be business. There would be a lot more on business. But this time, something happened on the defense and strategic cooperation, which asked us to focus on that direction a little bit more. Like, for example, they signed the first ever bilateral defense co-development project focused on the what they call unicorn, naval radio antenna. This is something which has been a priority area, defense cooperation, but this is also directly in a violation of the Article 9 of Japanese Constitution to many experts. So one of the interpretation of Article 9 is that Japan prohibits itself from defense export. So they also have three principles of defense exports. One is the clarification of cases where transfer will be prohibited totally. And then there is the cases where transfer may be permitted. And then the third is strict control and governance post the transfer happens. Many also question about the unicorn naval radio antenna collaboration, saying that Japan actually moved ahead of those restrictions that Japan has put itself for defense cooperation. But if you see the recent revisions in Japan's three principle on the transfer of defense equipment and technology, revisions were the critical enabler for this deal. Why would someone relax this when there is Article 9? But I would say it's far more normalization than militarization. So by relaxing this post-World War II bans on that limited exports on non-lethal categories like rescue mission or like transport, Japan can now legally transfer sensitive weapon grade technology to strategic partners like India. And one of that was signed during this visit. It is also very important considering the partnership between the countries in the Indo-Pacific. Other than the strategic and defense sector, there are priority areas which included economic security, included finance, included technology, included innovation, and then also people-to-people exchange, considering that next year we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary of India-Japan diplomatic relationship that was established in April 1952. So, what is the takeaway from this visit other than, I just like, as you know, I was traveling to Japan, so was not actually very, very much read through almost all the joint declarations that has been signed. But I just saw, the Ministry of External Affairs have given the 16th outcome of the 16th summit meeting. So, the kind of declaration that have been signed with AI, defense, economic security, energy security, and everything, rare earth metals and all. So if we say what we derive from this is one that re-emphasis on the Indo-Pacific synergy, the synergy between Japan's revised FYP, free and open Indo-Pacific, and India's Mahasagar. And then the evolution of defense type, which I was just explaining how Japan went ahead from these three principles, revised these three principles to start this defense cooperation. Then third is something called de-risking of supply chain. Now both this country, they focus heavily on critical minerals, rare earth metals, particularly digital technologies. Then the talk of direct currency swap without involving United States dollar between INR and JPY. This all showcase a mutual desire to insulate both the countries from external geopolitical shocks. You can have a leader like Donald Trump anytime. So, like when we are talking about shared values, shared freedom, shared interest, and then we are talking about Quad country, and suddenly one of the Quad countries is behaving almost like, imposing tariffs and giving statements on a day-to-day basis. So, India, Japan, like this de-risking of supply chain is mostly the Strait of Hormuz crisis, for example. This both Japan and India are suffering mostly because of one of their allied partner, that is United States. So this de-risking of supply chain is because of that. They just want to insulate both the countries. They both want to help each other to insulate both the countries from external geopolitical shocks. And then finally, the countering information warfare. You must have seen, like just when Sanai Takaichi was here, Chinese Global Times reported how they brought mineral waters with them, and they talk about Sanai Takaichi, like Modi being a bigger brother, elder brother of Sanai Takaichi, and at the same time, she doesn't trust India to drink their water, and they brought all water. So this amplified controversy, it only highlights Beijing's anxiety about India-Japan coming together and forming a New Delhi-Tokyo axis which will be much more difficult for them. So these are some of the takeaway from the visit that I can draw from the summit meeting.
So I think two things there. One, I believe as a student of political science and international relations that the validity of a constitution lies in just how much it can adapt to the times that it exists in. And there were certain restrictions that were introduced on the Japanese nation. But at the same time, in the changing times, if a country wants to evolve and adapt, I don't think it should come as a surprise. Where the second point about Beijing's anxiety that you mentioned, I think comes in, that China has consistently viewed closer India Japan ties with a lot of suspicion. In fact, recently, a spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry also warned against stoking confrontation by making groupings such as the Quad or discussing Indo-Pacific, where they might be excluding third parties, particularly in the context of Indo-Pacific and say the Quad grouping that we have. Like you said, that India-Japan relations have been defined by shared values of democracy and other shared values that the two countries have. Should Beijing's concerns be taken seriously in some way, given the kind of information warfare that there is? They go down to that level where they report things such as the mineral water that you spoke of. Should it be seen as India and Japan simply responding to strategic realities that are created by actors such as China and North Korea and other destabilizing factors that we have in the region from the perspective of these two countries, like India and Japan?
The third thing you said, it's absolutely correct. Most of the time, India and Japan are actually responding to the strategic compulsion they face in the region. And both China being a neighbor to India as well as neighboring country to Japan. Now coming back to the first thing, about the constitution must reflect the today's realities. You'd be surprised to know Japanese constitution has never been amended since its adoption. The amendment procedure is so difficult for a country. So that is how they are surviving with a interpretation of Japanese constitution again and again. For that matter, India's constitution, as old as the Japanese constitution is, has already been amended more than 100 times. So the procedural difficulty is another part. There is also popular rejection of amending the Japanese constitutions. That has more to do with history, less to do with the geopolitical realities of today. But having said that, you are quite right that saying, the constitution should always reflect the present realities. And the present realities are most of the thing that the strategic compulsion that India and Japan face emanates out of China's misadventures in both as India's neighbor and also as Japan's neighbor in East China Sea and South China Sea. Like, would I take China's spokesperson or whatever their criticism seriously? Like as a scholar of Japanese studies, I have seen time and again anything that Japan does always, attracts a criticism from Chinese side. Like anything, whether it is J. Suzumo, the helicopter aircraft carrier, when a vertical aircraft who just vertically took off from J. Suzumo, they said, "Oh, Japan militarized." If Japan militarized today, they will again go back to colonizing or the East Asia co-prosperity, like establishment of East Asia co-prosperity sphere and all, which has no basis in today's world. It's rather the other way around, with China's misadventure will showcase that they are on an expansion spree. They are on a trade trap as a tool with many other countries. So to me, it's nothing that Japan has done which should have attracted Chinese official critical reaction. Unlike with regard to your exclusive blocks, what Beijing cautions that bilateral cooperation should not be used as an exclusive, agreement to kind of have small groupings and all. But what about those trade agreements? What about those one belt, one corridor or one road? And then if they are particularly talking about Japan, Japan has a curious case of having a quad security alliance with India, Australia, and US. And also, Japan is also a part of the comprehensive trade agreement with China, RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which India is not a part of. So it's not about a grouping. If it's a security grouping, it's India a part of. If it is a business grouping, China is a part of. India is not. Japan actually wanted India to be part of that grouping, but because of various reasons, because of its own national calculation, India did not decide. So this criticism of exclusive small groupings targeted at China is wrong. The only example would be RCEP, where Japan decided to be part of that grouping in spite of China spearheading that group. So then China, the critical minerals and semiconductor. China currently dominates roughly about 70% of global rare earth mining and nearly 90% of its processing capacity. So what as China and what as Japan and India, who are always at the other side of the geopolitical calculus, what do you think about these materials that are vital for electrical vehicles, defense equipments, electronics? What do you think? What is the way ahead for them if they don't collaborate among each other? Because nowadays geopolitics, the rare earth metals, the energy security, it's almost like everyone wants to monopolize over it. So I don't think we should read much into China's criticism on India, Japan, or the grouping, or Quad, or FOIP for that matter. Just can simply sidestep as a propaganda, like they did with the mineral water case.
We discussed narratives are sold rather easily to people, and it is then the consumer's responsibility to really go in depth and analyze what is being told to them. And with regards to a country that criticizes certain things, if we were to start nitpicking, then there is a lot that can be said about the nations that choose to criticize strategic relationships that are established in countries such as India and Japan. On that note, however, you did speak about critical minerals and semiconductors, and a lion's share of it being dominated by China. Similarly, in other fields, there are other dominating countries. And earlier, geopolitics was defined a lot by the confrontations that took place in the military domain. But in the 21st century, now there is a lot that has come into the forefront. Apart from defense cooperation, you mentioned unicorn, which is something that India and Japan have discussed, are working on. There is also semiconductors, critical minerals, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, and much more. Where do you think that India and Japan should focus next?
Energy security and sustainable development goal and the focus on climate change has been critical for Japan for long. Like if you go to that country, I just came back and we are just discussing how you will find even the SDG 17 goals are pasted in a tap water, in any hotel, in anywhere you go. It's just remind you again and again that what you should focus on, what is about how we can make our livelihood better by focusing more on planning of resources and which in a way we can contribute to the world. Now, that is one of the area where Japan has been focusing. Like, for example, we are part of a country where our energy or particularly electricity generation, like mostly dependent upon coal-based electricity. Now, Japan, with its advanced technology, has now started to infuse ammonia into the coal-fired power plant to make it more sustainable, to reduce the NOx or carbon dioxide emissions. That is an area which I think we have already started discussing on those areas like ammonia, the hydrogen, green hydrogen based energy. I think these are like way to go. But for this moment, like even if you ask me like what do you see, like as we discussed, let's say 5 year or 10 year down the line, but what we see, that what we discussed earlier, that to mutually insulate from the geopolitical shocks, particularly with regard to what our interests currently are. Like for example, the rare earth metals, the 17 critical minerals that are very important for both Japan and India, for semiconductors, the batteries. I think to insulate from the geopolitical shock would be the first target, to completely insulate ourselves, and of course the energy, the petroleum products. Then there is what people call silicon and steel alliance, the economic security, semiconductors, critical mineral hub, the advanced defense integration and interoperability, that like whatever hardwares or softwares are being developed must be localized in the sense that it must be operational in locally in India. It must be operational locally in Japan as well. The reciprocal logistics and basing the existing acquisition and cross servicing agreements will depend from here on. By, let's say, by mid 2030s, you can say, that it's Japanese warships or long range patrolling aircraft will regularly turn around in Indian Ocean, in particular maybe in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, while Indian assets utilize facilities in Japan to monitor in the Western Pacific. So these are kind of the goals. But as I said, to like, I'm not someone who believes to keep a target of 200 and the next year 500 and the next year 700. I'm someone, if we have a target of 200 and we achieved it, then you must focus on consolidating it rather, shifting your goalpost for a further. So to me, consolidation of this insulation that they have now focused on, insulating them from the geopolitical shocks, particularly from China. Like I was just trying to read through one of the Chinese foreign ministry's response with regard to supply chain stability. I'm just reading out what they said. India and Japan's move to diversify supply chains, the Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun, he stated that it is the common responsibility of all countries. So, like, I'm quoting, common responsibility of all countries to keep global industrial supply chains safe and stable, urging an attitude of openness and cooperation. See who is saying. So it's not about, thinking about 10 years ahead about what new avenues of cooperation, rather how to consolidate it upon what we have decided to do at this summit meeting, how we can consolidate it upon those, how can we consolidate upon the yen and INR insinuating dollar, how we can insinuate in the energy security, not depending upon state of Hormuz crisis or a American restriction on free trade agreement or whatever. So those are, I think, more likely. And then it's obviously, new avenues of cooperation always creates news, but most of the time it remains as news. So I somehow believe that this is the time that India-Japan relationship must go to the consolidation level, not as a surface or superficial level. It must go. Here I can quote one thing, Shinzo Abe wrote a book called Utsukushi Kunie in Japanese, Towards a Beautiful Japan, or like Utsukushi Kunie was the book's title. He said, I wouldn't be surprised if India-Japan economic relationship surpasses that of Japan-China and Japan-United States relationship. And I'm just hoping this is the 10 year where they can consolidate themselves for their trade relationship, for their investment relationship, to surpass that of Japan-China and Japan-US. I think that is the more pertinent target rather than focus thinking about other avenues of collaborations.
I do believe that then what we do 10 years down the line gets shaped and determined by what we're doing today. So naturally, the focus should be with decade long future in vision. The focus should be on what we're doing at the present. For my final question, when you speak about consolidation and insulation, I think insulation comes also with increasing influence, among other things, in the field. If we look at the Indo-Pacific right now and taking into account the tentative future that awaits us, do you think that India and Japan can emerge as two principal architects of the Indo-Pacific region? Or do you think that it will continue to be dominated or shaped primarily by the US-China rivalry that exists? So in that regard, I think, where do we put the insulation and consolidation part when we think about this?
You are right. In India, Japan, particularly with regard to the Indo-Pacific, cannot be totally independent of the United States and its own domestic or international calculations. We have seen for the past 2 years, it has been difficult for having a Quad summit meeting. In May, we had the Quad foreign ministers meeting in Delhi. And if you see the joint declaration or if you read the joint statements, it's just about nothing other than re-emphasizing that, okay, we are quad together, we must re-emphasize this thing, we must re-emphasize this thing. Nothing really action-oriented. And this has more to do with Donald Trump and it's his individual attitude, behavior, approach, whatever you can say. Now, Quad framework, the Quad framework is mostly like it has to be reassured by the members themselves how to take it forward, the pre and open Indo-Pacific. So that is why I think this India-Japan bilateral relationship kind of totally seen as different from Quad. That is why there is a consistent focus on both free and open Indo-Pacific, the revised FOIP by Sanae Takaichi and India's Mahasagar, trying to say that our goal on FOIP and Indo-Pacific is in synergy. We don't need any third party, particularly referring to United States. And if you ask me, do actually these two countries bilaterally can do something in the Indo-Pacific region, totally disregarding US interests? That is a very difficult questions to answer. For example, let's say the Taiwan contingency, which brings Japan into the picture. I hardly see India has a good role to play in the Taiwan contingency, whereas Japan will be pulled into the war. Japan will be definitely pulled into war, as Shinzo Abe said. A Taiwan contingency is a Japanese contingency, but India has hardly a role to play. So likewise, whether this is a Gulang crisis or the Doklam crisis in India's neighborhood or the Arunachal, I hardly see Japan actually playing a role there. So both the country, they, in terms of strategic defense collaboration and partnership, it's very much in sync, in synergy. But when it comes to difficult questions of US-China rivalry or, China's like misadventures in both South Asia as well as in East China Sea, South China Sea, I hardly see much collaboration happening between these two countries. Having said that, as Sanae Takaichi is considered to be the keeper of the flame, or what she is what you can show the ideological successor of Shinzo Abe, and she reiterated that in her Times of India commentary, the editorial opinion piece that she wrote. She said, "This is from India that the confluence of two seas peace that the Indo-Pacific vision started, and now I see that both our revised FOIP and Prime Minister Modi's Mahasagar is in complete sync." So when they say complete sync, I see in everything, in energy security, yes; in supply chain, yes; in economic security, yes; in trade and investment, yes. But when it is comes to the geopolitical calculation of Indo-Pacific, I think they need each other as well as the other partners of Quad countries, and obviously the larger Indo-Pacific, to contain China, or to contain some leaders like Donald Trump, who will keep coming in the United States because of the trend towards nation first leaders all over the world at this moment. Yes, the conceptualization of free and open Indo-Pacific that was done by Abe has been given teeth by both the prime minister in their summit meeting, but I think a lot more to be done multilaterally, including the American president.
That does bring us to the end of the conversation. But like you said, it has been a time tested relationship and it will continue to be tested given how unstable the current geopolitics and international relations are. As your former student, I think it is my good fortune to have been able to hold this conversation with you today. So thank you so much and hope to have you back on Global Order.
Thank you, Swareena. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and have a great day.